Welcome to the Daily Dev Talk with me, Adrian Nantchev, where we explore and share stories and experiences from across the games industry, helping you make the best game you can. Stay tuned for today's episode. Good morning, Overload Nation. Adrian here, and I am with Kennedy Rose from Smarter Games to talk about their first game, Fox and Flocks. Kennedy, what can you tell us about yourself first?
I came from a web developer background, and then I founded Smarter Games at the start of this year. We've released two games. One's available for free on our website, smartergames.com, and the other one you can find it on Steam. So we're a pretty small company. I mostly just do outsourcing. We're just two full-time employees.
Oh, nice. Quite compact. So tell us, how long have you been in the games industry?
Not very long at all. I've kind of been making browser games. I made some like teaching aids, like stuff that makes crossword puzzles and things like that for elementary schools. But as for plot-oriented games, larger titles, it's pretty much just been this year. My experience outside of that has been pretty small.
Oh, so you kind of got into the games industry almost by accident or
Yeah.
unintentionally.
Yeah, basically, because I was doing web applications mostly, and it was kind of interesting because I did websites and web applications, and through doing that, at some point, I just kind of had this realization that I was already sort of making games. It never really
Mm.
hit me that that's like necessarily what these things were, and like little mazes for kids games. But yeah, I realized that I actually had the ability to make a full game, so I decided why not.
So, and then you started Smarter Games and eventually created Fox and Flocks.
Correct.
So, speaking of which, let's talk about that game. Let's talk about Fox and Flocks because it's very strategic. At the same time, it's not overly grand.
Yeah.
You tell us, Kennedy. Let's not put words in your mouth.
Yeah.
What's it about?
So it stems from there's a very old game called Fox and Geese. I think there's kind of a similar version called Fox and Hound, but it's kind of like checkers, except both sides play radically different. You have on one side there's 1 to 2 foxes, and on the flock you kind of play I think up to like 16 to 18 pieces. The goal of the flock is basically to escape the board, while the goal of the fox is to consume all of the flock before they can do it. So I had a lot of fun with this game. I couldn't find online anywhere. I played a lot with my fiance, and I couldn't find anywhere online where we could play it. There was nothing on our phones where we could easily play it. Every time we played it, we had to like set up a board. So I decided originally it was just going to be a game, just kind of for the two of us, and then I had this idea for a storyline, and I started drawing all the art, and the game just kind of bloomed into a larger thing. So
Oh yeah, I like the music in it. It's very
cool.
classical. Really matches the tone, and the narrator, how he rhymes. It really adds to that style of the game as well, and how how every flock has is a different animal, and there's always like personalities in them.
Yeah, yeah.
It's very clever, very crafty,
Right.
very
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah. I didn't want it to be, as simple as like red versus black, or where everything's uniformed. I kind of wanted it to actually feel like a ballroom where you have different personalities and
Mm.
sort of mingling together.
And that is what you specifically aimed for from the very beginning, that the player would experience.
Yeah,
That it will be a ballroom and not as standard or linear as checkers.
correct. Yeah, I don't necessarily have a problem with puzzle games, but I've always preferred more of like a narrative approach. Yeah, even if it's something as simple as puzzle games. I mean, I kind of want to give players a reason to be drawn into playing the next level, and I think that it makes it a little harder to put down. Whereas a puzzle game, you might play 1 or 2 levels, and then the mystery is kind of over. Whereas if there's a plot, there's character development and things like that, you kind of want to explore that world a little bit more.
Hmm. So let's talk a little about your experiences while working on the game.
Sure.
What what was the happiest moment while working on the game? You mentioned that you outsource a lot, so maybe it was something to do with outsourcing.
Yeah, I think that the I had quite a bit of luck finding the narrator. It's a guy named Dick Terhune. I guess he's done some NPC work on games like World of Warcraft and stuff like that. And I managed to find him. He worked very quickly. He was like pretty easy to work with, and he just kind of nailed it. I did some other auditions with everyone else, and no one seemed to have quite the range he does. Without spoiling the storyline, the narrator kind of the game amps up, and the narrator sort of needs to uh, get more excited as time goes on about the story. And he was the only one who really had a good enough range to do that, to kind of start off small and end big. And so I was pretty lucky to have him.
What was his name again? Dick Terrin.
Dick Terhune. I think his last name is Terhune.
Okay. So tell us, what was your light bulb moment while working on the game? The time where you saw the game come together from pen and paper to PC.
Um, I think it was whenever I started doing all the art. I was kind of desperately trying to figure out, and I was listening to the music, trying to get into my head what the setting was and who the characters were. And I remember drawing it, and I was like racking my brains trying to figure out how to color it. I was, painting over and over again different colors and textures. And at some point, I had a parchment texture, and I just kind of popped it in. And I was thinking, how do I color this? I walked away. I came back and I looked at it, with a fresh brain, not thinking about color,
Hmm.
and it looked fine. I realized it didn't. It fit the music. It fit the scene. It didn't need to be. It didn't need to be anything more than what it was. Same with the music. I didn't see any reason to license out, musicians that are going to make something on their computer when there's so much orchestral music out there that fits a ballroom setting. So,
I I think that's a very good strategy, Overload Nation and Kennedy. I think it's a great strategy to walk away from your product for a day or two or something like that
yeah,
and go again and look at it again with fresh eyes and think, does this really work? Does that really match? Does it fit?
yeah, for
Because
sure.
you've gone away, you've forgotten about it, you've been distracted, and you come back with a fresh mind.
Right.
So I've done that a few times in the games I've made,
Mhm.
and it's always a great strategy.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of think that's why some of our best ideas come to us in the shower or wherever. It's because that's the one time where we're forced to be away from our computer and our tools, and it kind of makes your brain sort of reboot into a natural setting with nothing around it.
Exactly. But I find that because you're the same person who created it before, it's not truly refreshing because you understand it fully. If someone came from outside, which is even better,
Yeah,
even better,
sure.
total fresh eyes. And speaking of the outside, Kennedy,
Mhm.
how did you go about promoting the game?
So I was approached by a publisher named Flying Interactive. So they kind of handle most of that. I do a little bit. They mostly handle the actual advertisements of the game. I mostly just submit it to as many places that'll do reviews and that kind of thing as possible. But that, it's kind of interesting because I come from a marketing background, yet I don't want to do it for this game.
Oh,
I don't. I would rather stay focused on the game itself, and I think that's because I do come from a marketing background that I know how much work goes into that. That's something that I think a lot of indie developers underestimate. That if no one knows about your game, you essentially don't have a game. You don't have an audience, and that
hmm.
takes a lot more time than a lot of people think, and that is a job in and of its own. So, I don't believe that most publishers are out to. I don't believe that they're just bottom feeders. I think that most of them can actually do a job. They perform a service that's necessary. So I use
Yeah,
it.
I heard from a developer. I think it was the guy behind
Hmm.
Payday 2, said that he'd put more money into making the game and less so into marketing. So the customers, the gamers, the consumers have an awesome product and they are willing to tell their mates
Right.
about it, tell their friends about it. So it's the marketing is inherent of the game.
Yeah, it certainly can be. You definitely have to give it that initial push, but I think if your game is interesting enough, it can thrive on its own reasonably well.
Oh yeah, I mean like no amount of good marketing will save any game, any bad game that is.
I absolutely agree with that. I think actually, it can kind of punish a game. I think most recent example is Arkham Knight just came out, and there's a PC port. and the PC port is awful. And so it's like they have all this marketing behind this game that just doesn't work. So the reviews for the PC version are horrid, even though it's a great game. But the PC version just will not play on most PCs. But
I
so it's kind of a waste of a lot of marketing money is going into marketing this game, and people are just requesting refunds like crazy. So
oh wow, yeah.
yeah, I think no amount of marketing will save a bad game. But if you have a good game, I think that marketing is remarkably important.
No amount of marketing will save a bad game.
Hmm.
Very wise words there, Kennedy. So tell me, what was the biggest thing you learned while working on the game?
I don't know that there was much that I took away from too much learning the game. I think that if anything, I think that I guess I learned the uh, the importance of finding the right price point. I think that if you offer a game for free, which was kind of the original strategy was I was thinking it's our first game, well, I'll just throw it out there for free. The more I did research and the more I thought about it, I think offering a game for free sends a bad message kind of about what your game is, and people don't expect a lot out of it. But if you charge a certain amount, not too much, it's just enough for people to know that it's worth something.
I think finding the right price is a marketing and business dilemma because if it's free, people won't value it in a
Yeah.
way. But at the same time, if it's not really finished or built yet or incomplete, then that's understandable because it's free. But I
Yeah.
think if it's overpriced, yeah, if it's overpriced, you got a massive problem for a game that doesn't justify it or warrant it.
Hmm.
And yet at the same time, some people could think that even if you put it at the right price, they could think that it's undervalued or slightly overvalued because of their own opinions. But
Oh,
yet at the same time, you want to you could argue that you want to price out some of the consumers to not buy the game and target the proper niche within the gaming audience that whom you really want to buy the game.
sure. Yeah. Yeah, I kind of use the movie ticket, scale where you pay $10 for a movie ticket, you see a two-hour movie. So I kind of went by that. You can complete the storyline in about that amount of time, depending on skill level, of course. But so that's the price right now is $2. It was on sale when it came out, but and I think that's a pretty reasonable price when you put it up against a movie. And in some ways, I wonder if I didn't charge enough because a lot of the reviews are a lot of people are saying this is a great game. I wasn't expecting much, and that makes me wonder why were they not expecting much? And I think it could be because of the price, especially when it's
Mhm.
on a Steam sale. People are getting it for $1. So yeah, I think I guess maybe I wouldn't expect a whole lot out of it either.
So I think the best thing to take away is to know or at least understand as much as you can
Hmm.
of what the players are going to expect from it,
Hmm.
so you can price it accordingly.
Right. Yeah. And and if I were to charge like the full $10, I think that a lot of people would go the other way and say that there's just not enough game here to justify that. So, that could be
Exactly.
one of those tricky areas, and you do have to think about it both before you even make the game and reevaluate it after you even finish it. You kind of need to keep thinking about that.
It seems to be like law of diminishing returns. The more you price, and yet if they don't justify it, the reviews or the
Hmm.
the more reviews will go down.
Right. Yeah.
So, what was the worst thing that happened, and how did you overcome it?
Um, Well, I know that there was some memory leaks on the programming side whenever people were using Retina Display Max. It took, it just takes more time to render everything when there's that much more pixels. So I just kind of overcame it just by running back through the code and trying to make everything as performant as I possibly could. To some degree, I almost didn't overcome it because there is a note. On the system requirements where if you do have a Mac, you need a little extra RAM to play it, and that's kind of just unfortunate. There's not a whole lot I can do about that, but for the most part, yeah, if you meet those requirements, the game should run just fine.
Oh wow, that's kind of the worst thing if the player can't play it simply because of the requirements. So that was render display max kind of issues.
Yeah, yeah, it's specifically to Retina display, just because the resolution is so much higher than standard. But fortunately, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's fortunately most gamers are on PCs, so it's a very small minority that ever face that problem at all. So
Yeah, I'm playing on a laptop, and
mm,
I had no problems.
yeah,
No drop in FPS or anything of the sort like that. It played beautifully.
great, cool.
So, what what was the best game developer related purchase or investment you made? Whether it was a software license or a top quality piece of hardware or equipment, or it could simply be a good desk and a comfy chair.
Yeah, I kind of think. I mean, all those are important. I think for me, the best one, and it's kind of a strange answer, but it's the honest answer, is probably my iPad. I actually, not for Fox and Flock, but for other games, I actually compose most or all of the music on my iPad, as well as everything in Fox and Flock was drawn on the iPad with pressure-sensitive stylus. So I can still work on a screen and it's still vector. I can move it into Photoshop and Illustrator and resize it, and it still looks great. But it still feels like I'm drawing on a pen and paper. So I was worried about doing a bunch of work on an iPad, but I think it really paid off. I was able to draw everything in the entire game on the iPad, and then just move it over to Illustrator and pop it right in the game. And yeah,
So you could do that while you're not at home on the commute or something. That's
right.
pretty mobile studio, isn't it?
Yeah, basically, yeah. I feel like you could. I mean, if you really wanted to, I'm willing to bet you could easily make an entire game and actually code the whole thing on an iPad. That's certainly not something I would recommend, but I think if you're an artist, an iPad is a much cheaper alternative to a tablet, a computer tablet.
Hmm. And speaking of which, there's these things called like train jam,
Hmm.
where you take a train journey like across the United States, like Florida to
Right.
Washington,
Yeah.
and I don't know, say it's 20 or so hours, or even a flight across Europe or across America, whatever. And you in that time you make a game.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard of that.
Have you heard about those at all?
Yeah. I think
I
I
think
recently saw a documentary that just came out. I think where they went over a train jam. I can't remember the name of it, but yeah, I do know what you're talking about.
so. It's like an iPad would be perfect for one of those.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I I especially like because I do all the coding on a MacBook, so I have a MacBook and an
Mm.
iPad that all fits perfectly in a pretty small case, and so yeah, I can kind of move my whole game studio anywhere at any time.
Cross continental.
Yeah.
Did you use this like a stylus or a certain kind of special pen for the iPad?
Yeah, I can't remember the name of it, but yeah, it's a pressure sensitive stylus that works with I can't remember I think it's Adobe Draw, I think is what it's called. Um, yeah, I'd highly recommend it if you come from a background of working on pen and paper, you want to make vector art. I think that's definitely the way to go.
And tell me a bit about vector art as well, because I've heard about that vector before, and you can't really break the resolution or make it look stretched or squashed, as I hear like with pixels.
Yeah, so that's raster. With raster art, that's the problem. You can't really stretch it. It breaks the resolution. But the advantage to vector is that it's all mathematics. All your lines come down, and the math scales very nicely. So I could take all the art in Fox and Flock. I could blow it up into a giant poster or a T-shirt, and it'll always look good. So there, I definitely think that anyone that's serious about game development, if you're going to be doing hand-drawn art, you should still find a way to keep it vector for because you never know. Like there's a lot of games that they're trying to that came from like the PlayStation era that they're trying to port over, and the graphics kind of look like garbage, and that's kind of why they didn't plan to scale that up. But you should always plan for the future.
Yeah, but how does that even work? How does vector work? Because if you scale something not to proportion,
Uh-huh.
how can it still be in proportion as
Well,
opposed?
yeah, you should never like squish it or anything like that, but you can scale it up and down. Because it basically just increases the numbers. Like all my lines, like if I draw a curved line, that doesn't actually save the pixels. You know what I mean? It saves. this line and this line. It says it curves at this degree. So whenever you scale that up, it just scales up where those degrees are and where. Yeah, I'm certainly awful at math. Someone could probably explain it better, but in a nutshell, yeah, vector art is just all using math. When you scale it up, it'll just scale up all the math in your picture, as opposed to raster, which is every single pixel. If you scale it up, those pixels just get big and ugly. And
Yeah, exactly. Because I've heard of vector before,
yeah,
and I heard there's also like vector cameras as well.
oh
Does
really?
those even do those even exist?
I don't. I haven't heard of such a thing. I'm not sure.
Ah, I must be mistaken because I thought I heard about that ages ago, and I was wondering if that it truly existed. Because
Yeah, I don't know.
goodbye pixels and
Yeah.
hello vectors. So, tell me, do you have any game developer related book, lecture, or learning resource that you can recommend?
I kind of digest a lot of game postmortems that are on Gama Sutra. I think those are really great. If you can find the oddest ones where people will, if you're not familiar, a postmortem of the game is when someone kind of writes up a report or does a video where they discuss sort of everything that went right with the game and everything that went wrong in order to try and identify, what worked, what didn't, what can we learn. I think it's important for people to do them after every game that you make, no matter how big or small, so you can kind of remember and figure out what you did right. So yeah, you can kind of like get ahead of the game by reading other people's postmortems, and that way you don't have to repeat their mistakes. You can kind of uh, dodge the bullet before it ever comes. There's also a book. It's called the Art of Game Design, a book of lenses. It's pretty good. I don't know that I agree with everything in there, but I definitely think I probably took a lot away from it.
Well, going back a little bit, Game of Sutra, definitely agree. The post-mortem things, definitely agree. There's nothing wrong with making mistakes,
Sure.
but nothing's to stop you from learning the mistakes of others
Right.
and learning from other people.
Exactly.
So it's like don't do this because someone's already tried that, saves you so and so amount of time,
Hmm.
and you get to the same answer that took them, say, a game
Yeah.
to come to that conclusion. So yeah, post-mortem, that's definitely worth checking out, Overload Nation.
Yeah.
And that book, Art of Game Design, what kind of things did you not agree with exactly?
Um, I can't remember specifically, but the idea of the book is that there's all these different lenses for which you're supposed to look at your game and analyze it. So you're supposed to look at it from these different points of views and figure out what you can change when you're kind of iterating over the idea. I guess a lot of the book was like too ambiguous. I actually think you could have probably, yeah, I can't remember how many lenses there are. There's like 60. There's a lot. And I think that you could have almost pared that down to like 10 of the important ones. And, there's some that are like, how fun is your game? But, how do you measure that? That's kind of tricky.
Seems very subjective.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know that, and there's no good measurement for that. I can definitely, I could have easily have one person play my game, Fox and Flock, and say it's great, and have another person play it who just hates puzzle games and they'll think it's the worst piece of garbage ever. So
Hmm.
I think if you're going to kind of take an analytical approach to games, you need to focus on the things that are, tangible and things you can actually measure.
Exactly. Like for the code example.
Yeah, sure. And
Hmm.
one of the good things about the book was he said you should start with an experience, which I think is great advice. Don't start with like I have a cool idea for a story or a mechanic. You look into the world and you think, uh, there's this great. I really like snowboarding. Like how do I? Maybe you want to have that kind of convey that experience, but not make a snowboarding game. And there's kind of interesting ways of doing that. So yeah, I think you should always start with some kind of experience or feeling or emotion, and then work from there.
Ah, interesting. I get you. I get you.
Yeah.
Like an Evernote or Trello, do you have a useful or productivity enhancing software, app, extension, or website worth sharing?
Sort of. I typically don't use a whole lot of that kind of thing. I use Asana for project management, so it just kind of tracks different tasks that you have, and uh, I don't think that that one in particular is better than the rest. I think the project management tools are more or less all the same. They have different bells and whistles. So my advice is just find one and use it. Don't really worry about which one it is. But I think project management tools are very useful.
Ah, yeah, I agree, definitely. Because some of them simply don't work for you or just not the same. Like I tend to use pen and paper a lot,
Yeah,
but when
sure.
it came to when I heard about Calendly,
Hmm.
I thought that's perfect for this scenario to get these interviews booked and planned and organized rather than me writing them down,
Right.
remembering them and such like that. So I can just see them all. Refresh page. Okay, I got one at this time. That's the game. This is the Skype name, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it was
Absolutely
also great
beautiful.
because before Fox and Flock was the first game I completed using only Asana as the project management tool, and it was cool because I could see like how many things that I drew, and I could see how many bugs were in the game, how many bugs I fixed, how many I didn't. I could see an actual timeline of like when I was most productive on certain days, and I could accurately tell people like how long the whole development cycle took, and I couldn't really do that before on pen and paper, so.
Hmm. And what was the name of that project management
The
tool?
one I use is Asana. It's Asana,
A
Asana.com. Yeah.
SANA.com. Okay, ASANA. Very nice.
Mhm.
Worth checking out.
Yeah.
Worth checking out, Overload Nation. And lastly, Kennedy, what advice can you give to aspiring game developers, small indie studios, or people trying to get to where you are today?
Uh, that's an interesting question. I don't think that I think it's one of those things where you can just do it. Like there's no reason. I'm not coming out against like these game design schools, and I'm all for higher education, and but I do think that it's still one of those things that you should just start doing. I don't think that you shouldn't wait. I think I can't remember who said the quote, but you should never wait for someone to give you permission to do anything.
Yeah.
That's just life advice. And it's the same thing with game development, or even if you want to be a writer or an artist, that you shouldn't wait for some college professor to say, okay, now you're officially allowed to do it. You should just start doing it. That I mean, that I guess that doesn't apply to like surgeons. You should probably not do
Oh,
unlicensed, but I think yeah, for sure, like artists and game developers, just start reading up and just start doing what you can do.
yeah, I hear that if you're a songwriter, write songs. If you're a blogger, blog. If you interview people, interview people. If you're a writer in general, write in general.
Yeah,
If you just do it and just you'll learn, pick up
sure.
from your mistakes, and it'll happen. It'll just go. And there's a quote that I know from the guy who founded LinkedIn said that if you are not embarrassed by a product by your first product, then you waited too long.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's good.
Um, And going back just a little bit, just do it. There's a quote by Richard Branson that said something on the lines of, "Just do it, and you'll figure it out along the way."
Yeah,
And
I think
I agree with what you said about higher education, especially for like hard sciences, or law or it's history, not history, like sciences or law or very technical stuff where there's a definite yes or no answer to certain scenarios. But certainly for art things, I think that increasingly now, especially in the future, it'll be a nice to have
yeah,
a college or university degree where it's all about the portfolio, about your skills, but what you have done and what you can do, as
right,
opposed to kind of you could argue as opposed to what you've achieved.
right.
And here's my credentials. Because I think people who have done it for, I think I have to say 10 years,
Mhm.
that credential doesn't mean much. Then it's all
Yeah,
about portfolio and skill and what you've done, what you've worked on.
yeah, I agree. And I anymore. I mean, I guess you guys probably don't have this problem, but there's a huge debt problem in America with people going to college. Education costs so much. People constantly go in debt here. It's worse than it's ever been. But again, I'm not saying that college is unimportant. I think that if you feel like you'll get something out of it, then great. But along the way, I think that it is way more important to just start making games and start. Even if you know you have a bad game, start submitting it to awards and that kind of thing. Uh,
Hmm.
just keep doing it.
Exactly. Exactly. I agree. And I heard about this issue with debt and a few other issues in America. And if you're doing a degree in law or biology or chemistry, very good, powerful. I agree completely. If it's going to be in Native American basket weaving, then I'm
Right.
not so inclined. Not
Yeah.
so inclined to that.
Yeah, the harsh reality is that with especially if you're going to be an indie game developer, I can almost promise you you're never going to be able to wipe that debt out on an indie developer salary. You know, if you want to do big AAA games, you know, you can probably take care of it. But the industry right now has a problem with layoffs. You know, as soon as a AAA game is finished, they pretty much lay off half the studio, and you're out of a job. And it's kind of a nightmare. There's a lot of horror stories out there about that. But
Wow, I didn't know about that. Did not know about the AAA studios laying off half the staff roughly.
oh,
That's
it's
quite
yeah, it's remarkably common.
yeah, exactly. Oh, more common as well. Wow.
Hmm.
Uh, to be honest, I think that's all the more reason to start your own studio,
Hmm.
as opposed to climbing the corporate ladder. You own it.
Right.
I hear that if you spend 10 years building a career in a business,
Hmm.
you'll look back when you're at the top, quote unquote, and you'll think, look at all the effort. Was it really truly worth it? Or that took 10 years, 10 years too much of doing 9 to 5 and working towards somebody else's dream, as opposed to having your own studio, having your own business,
Sure.
and building your game that you want, and building your studio that you want, by both of which by your own rules.
Right. Yeah, I did. Whenever I left another company in the marketing department, and in the exit interview, my boss's boss was basically telling me, you know, there's an intrinsic value in doing what we do. We get to work on cool products, and I remember kind of thinking, but A, that's subjective, but more importantly for me, it's more important that I kind of own my work and I want to take more personal responsibility for both the success and the failure of things. Whereas, uh, you know, if you're working in a AAA company and you don't own it, you could make some amazing decisions and you'll never see an extra dime for it, or you could make some horrible decisions and you'll still just kind of keep barely floating along with your head above water and completely oblivious to how good or bad your work is.
Yeah, and you're adding a set amount of value, but you're not always going to get rewarded
Hmm.
in proportion to that value,
Right.
whether it's underpaid or overpaid.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I think by starting your own business and doing it your own way, it's in the long term, especially, it's of true reward.
Sure. Yeah, and and part of the reason why, kind of one of the philosophies that I'm approaching it with, which, you know, right now I only have contractors, but I still want to protect the contractors and anyone that I ever hire on full time in the future uh, from kind of the business and the marketing side. I want them to be able to kind of create their art almost in a bubble with each other, which, you know, some people think that's a bad idea, but in the past, I've seen a lot of you know, web developers, artists, graphic designers, whatever, not really constantly being told what to do. They're told not to bend certain rules and saying, no, we can't do this, we can't do that. I would rather just have a team that does. I think that my strategy is more you get talented people and then you just let them be talented people and they will always surprise you. You should never just, you know, force them to go. You can't say, oh, this game has to be out on this date, so we're going to have to cut corners. I mean, they just kind of need to do what they need to do and the game will be done when it's done.
Yeah, I love that quote, and I know a similar one to that by Steve Jobs, who said, "You can't mandate productivity."
Sure, yeah, that's absolutely true. I think that you know, I've seen burnout happen many times, not just in the games industry, but that's a huge problem. You know, there's whenever people go through crunch time on a game, I mean, that might be good and that might satisfy your deadline, but yeah, you're really burning out your developers. You're making them leave the games industry, leave your company. I think it creates a bad product. There's like so much negativity in it when people don't want to do their jobs and
Because they're simply tired.
yeah, I mean, again, I think it just comes back to if you get talented people, if you make sure you're hiring the right people, and then you keep them happy, you don't really need to worry about like, you know, walking around with a bullwhip and telling everyone to get to work.
Hmm.
And if you have to do that, then maybe you hired the wrong people. Maybe that's the problem.
Yeah, you want to hire slow but fire fast.
I'm sorry?
Hire slow but
Uh,
fire fast,
yeah.
so as to build the right team.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of believe in a pretty strong vetting process as far as I do think that when I do get to that point, hopefully I'll be able to just sort of contract on a part-time basis or something to sort of figure out if
Mm.
it is right for both of us. Because I also don't want to, if someone else has a job or they work, another state away, I certainly don't want to pull them away from their job, have them come work for me, and then it doesn't work out, and then they're out of a job. That's not good for them either. It's not just about me. I don't want to wreck someone's life like that. So I think you have to be
Truly.
super careful about who's on your team for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, I totally agree and totally understand. But aside from all that, Kennedy,
Hmm.
it appears that we're out of time.
All right.
I wish you well on your future endeavors.
Sure.
It was
You as well.
awesome talking to you.
Yep.
Awesome talking to you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Daily Dev Talk with me, Adrian Nantchev. If you are a game developer that wants to get your name and game out there and to share your experiences and stories, then contact me at info@gameoverload.co.uk. That's info@gameoverload.co.uk. Stay tuned for tomorrow's episode. More to come.